Mrs. Monroe has something to give you, Robert, Miss Morgan said. Then Mrs. Monroe came forward and put the bundle in his arms. What a nice little boy. Robbie placed the package carefully on the floor and put his hands behind him. Open it, Robert, said T.B. Allen sternly. Where are your manners? Robbie gazed resentfully at him. Yes, sir, he said, and untied the string. The shirts and the new overalls lay open before him, and he stared at them uncomprehendingly. Suddenly, he seemed to realize what they were. His face flushed warmly. For a moment, he looked about nervously like a trapped animal, and then he bolted through the door, leaving the little heap of clothing behind him. The school board heard 2 steps on the porch, and Robbie was gone. Mrs. Monroe turned helplessly to the teacher. What's wrong with him, anyway? I think he was embarrassed, said Miss Morgan. But why should he be? We were nice to him. The teacher tried to explain and became a little angry with them in trying. I think, you see, why I don't think he ever knew he was poor until a moment ago. It was my mistake, John Whiteside apologized. I'm sorry, Miss Morgan. Well, what can we do about him? Bert Monroe asked. I don't know. I really don't know. Mrs. Monroe turned to her husband. Bert, I think if you went out and had a talk with Mr. Maltby, it might help. I don't mean you to be anything but kind. Just tell him little boys shouldn't walk around in bare feet in the frost. Maybe just a word like that'll help. Mr. Maltby could tell little Robert he must take the clothes. What do you think, Mr. Whiteside? I don't like it. You'll have to vote to overrule my objection. I've done enough harm. Well, I think his health is more important than his feelings, Mrs. Monroe insisted. School closed for Christmas week. On the 20th of December, Miss Morgan planned to spend her vacation in Los Angeles. While she waited at the crossroads for a bus to Salinas, she saw a man and a little boy walking down the Pastures of Heaven road toward her. They were dressed in cheap new clothes, and both of them walked as though their feet were sore. As they neared her, Miss Morgan looked closely at the little boy and saw that it was Robbie. His face was sullen and unhappy. Why, Robert, she cried. What's the matter? Where are you going? The man spoke. We're going to San Francisco, Miss Morgan. She looked up quickly. It was Junius, shorn of his beard. She hadn't realized that he was so old. Even his eyes, which had been young, looked old. But of course he was pale because the beard had protected his skin from sunburn. On his face there was a look of deep puzzlement. Are you going up for the holidays? Miss Morgan asked. I love the stores in the city around Christmas. I could look in them for days. No, Junius replied slowly. I guess we're going to be up there for good. I am an accountant, Miss Morgan. At least I was an accountant 20 years ago. I'm going to try to get a job. There was pain in his voice. But why do you do that? She demanded. You see, he explained simply, I didn't know I was doing an injury to the boy here. I hadn't thought about it. I suppose I should have thought about it. You can see that he shouldn't be brought up in poverty. You can see that, can't you? I didn't know what people were saying about us. Why don't you stay on the ranch? It's a good ranch, isn't it? Oh, but I couldn't make a living on it, Miss Morgan. I don't know anything about farming. Jacob is going to try to run the ranch, but you know, Jacob is very lazy. Later, when I can, I'll sell the ranch so that Robbie can have a few things he never had. Miss Morgan was angry, but at the same time, she felt she was going to cry. You don't believe every silly thing that people tell you, do you? He looked at her in surprise. Of course not. But you can see for yourself that a growing boy shouldn't be brought up like a little animal, can't you? The bus came into sight on the highway and bore down on them. Junius pointed to Robbie. He didn't want to come. He ran away to the hills. Jacob and I caught him last night. He's lived like a little animal too long, you see. Besides, Miss Morgan, he doesn't know how nice it'll be in San Francisco. The bus squealed to a stop. Junius and Robbie climbed into the back seat. Miss Morgan was about to get in beside them. Suddenly she turned and took her seat beside the driver. Of course, she said to herself. Of course. They want to be alone.